Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this very special and exciting program with our History Revealed series. And we're so excited to have this wonderful film, the premiere of this great film. And Peter will be introducing the filmmakers in a minute. I'm Robin Priestley with the Ramsey County Historical Society. And again, I want to thank all of you for being here and welcome you on this blustery night. We are heading into, I believe it's our 7th year now of our partnership with the Eastside Freedom Library and the Roseville Library, and I want to thank them for all their support for the series of History Revealed programs. And please consider supporting the Ramsey County Historical Society and the Eastside Freedom Library. We rely on the support of members and supporters like you to continue to present these programs and all of our efforts. And you can find out more about both the Eastside Freedom Library and the Ramsey County Historical Society on our websites, which is on the slide on your screen. Just as a reminder, I'm going to ask everybody to please keep your microphones and personal cameras turned off during the program to avoid interference and so forth. But please feel free to type your questions and comments in the chat. And Peter and I will be reading the questions out loud for the filmmakers to answer after the film. The program is being recorded and it will be up on our RCHS and the Eastside Freedom Library YouTube channels probably after Thanksgiving, but it will be up soon. So before I turn it over to Peter Ratcliffe from the Eastside Freedom Library, we want to acknowledge the sacred Dakota land. Minnesota Mekoche, the land where the waters are so clear they reflect the clouds, is the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. It is also home to the Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples. The Ramsey County Historical Society acknowledges that its sites are located on and benefit from these sacred Dakota lands. RCHS is committed to preserving our past, informing our present, and inspiring our future. Part of doing so is acknowledging the painful history and current challenges facing the Dakota people, just as we celebrate the contributions of Dakota and other indigenous peoples. You can find our full land acknowledgement statement on our website. Again, it's www.rchs.com. And it includes actionable ways in which RCHS pledges to honor the Dakota and other indigenous peoples of Minnesota, Mekoche. So this year and next year, we are continuing to work on presenting the stories and histories of all in our community, which is all part of our Making Minnesota series, which is exploring those untold stories, histories, and experiences of some of the worldwide immigrant, African-American, and indigenous communities that make up Ramsey County, our most diverse county in Minnesota. So thank you all for being here again. I'm going to turn it over to Peter Ratcliffe, our partner in this program, to introduce the filmmakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you so much for handling the tech this evening and your continued leadership in this partnership. I want to mention that this Saturday, we will be hosting a program again in partnership with the Ramsey County Historical Society and the American Composers Forum, a program about immigrants and identity. And it will be in person at the Landmark Center at 1 o'clock this Saturday. And it will be featuring Kalia Yang. And Kalia will be talking particularly about the process by which her book, The Song Poet, is being adapted to become an opera that the Minnesota Opera will be staging in March. And I also want to invite you to join us by Zoom on Sunday. We will have a panel discussion of workers responding to the visual art exhibit of essential workers' portraits done by Carolyn Sue Olson from Duluth. And we should be hearing from 6 to 8 workers, a nurse, a teacher, a bus driver, grocery store worker, who are depicted in Carolyn's art exhibit. And we want to find out how that becoming visible is changing their lives or not in this economic and political climate. I also want to mention that this History Revealed program will continue in December with Adam Bledsoe, who's a professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. And Adam will be talking about his research on the history of African American activism in Minneapolis. And that will be on December 8th at 7 p.m. strictly by Zoom. So tonight we are viewing and discussing this new film about, I think the title is very carefully chosen, The Farmer Labor Movement, a Minnesota story. So it's not just about a political party, but about a social and political and economic movement. And the film, this is its world premiere tonight. And we have the three filmmakers with us. Randy Croce, who's been a documentary photographer and video producer since the mid-1970s. Some of us are big fans of his If This Stone Could Speak, about radical Italian immigrant stonecutters who made their own tombstones and left them for posterity in the wonderful community of Barre, Vermont. And Randy also had a lead hand in the making of the film, Who Built Our Capitol? And there's a wonderful website along with that film I encourage you to look at. Randy worked at the University of Minnesota Labor Education Service, where he produced films about workers and unions. Tom O'Connell has a very special place in our hearts as the first chairperson of the board of the Eastside Freedom Library. Tom is a retired professor of political studies at Metro State and has taught and written about social movements with a special focus on Minnesota's farmer labor and progressive populist histories. And then we have Anna Kurhajic, and Anna has a PhD in history from the University of Illinois and is currently teaching in the history program of the Doherty Family College at the University of St. Thomas. So the plan for this evening is Randy will say a little bit to contextualize the project that produced the film. We will watch the film, which is just under an hour long, and then Randy and Tom and Anna will respond to questions that hopefully very politely you type into the chat so that Robin and I have something to do during the film, and we will read those questions out to Randy, Tom, and Anna. So let me turn this over to you, Randy, to tell folks about the film they're about to see.
Okay. Back in 2014, Tom came to Labor Education Service with the idea of making a documentary about the farmer labor movement. He was president and is of the Farmer Labor Education Committee. And so he and Anna and I have been working on and off on this project all that time. And many, many other people contributed to the project. We certainly can't name them all. Some of them show up in the credit roll at the end, but I encourage you to actually go to the Farmer Labor Education Committee website, which you'll see a slide for later on, just to see the scores and scores of people that helped us produce this show. And I think that's it for now. I just want you to have a chance to see it. And after working largely just among ourselves, it's really nice to share it with an audience. And thank you all so much for coming. A lot of you contributed to this show. So here we go. Oops. Of course, let's see.
I
Hmm.
can't get any more.
Oh, here we go. Share screen. All right. Sorry, it should be showing up. Well. Well, let's see if this works. Nope. Of course, this worked perfectly at 6:30.
I think you're sharing your desktop rather than.
Yeah, I
the-
know. Because the film isn't showing up. Here, I'll just cancel it out and start it again.
Randy, do you want me to stop your sharing and then you can reshare? Or do you want to keep sharing?
Yeah, yeah, probably so.
Okay. I'll
What I
stop.
should do is turn off, yeah. There we go. All right. All right, now I'll share again. Share screen. Here we go, there it is.
In the gloom of mighty cities, midst the roar of whirling wheels, we are toiling on for hours yet untold.
And our bosses hope to keep us ever thus beneath their heels, and to coin our very lifeblood into gold.
We must find a way by which every member of society can share in the benefits of industrial progress and wealth, and employ the government to work together for the common good.
There are very few farmers now who are in the position to start their sons or daughters off with a farm. What a tragedy. Haven't we enough common, ordinary horse sense to set about building a better social system than this? People need jobs, equality, education. The least powerful person in the country, understanding collective bargaining, can become the most powerful. And that is what politics is all about.
Farmers and laborers, rural and urban working people, saw their dreams for a better life slipping through their fingers. They reached out and joined hands with neighbors and coworkers, forming social and political ties to create the farmer labor movement.
But we have a glowing dream of how fair the world will seem when everyone can live their lives secure and free. When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be.
Their alliance challenged a political system corrupted by the corporate monopolies of the day and created a revolution in Minnesota politics, one that reverberates today.
The farmer labor movement was both a political party and a grassroots social movement. The key to its success was this connection between politics as we normally understand it and social movement organizing, all directed toward a vision that put the needs of the majority over the interests of the wealthy and the powerful few.
The movement created the most successful alternative to the two-party political system in United States history. Farmer laborites brought 3 Minnesota governors to office, elected 4 U.S. senators, 9 U.S. representatives, and a host of local political leaders. No other third party has held as much power for as long as a Farmer Labor Party did in Minnesota. The party vied with the Republicans to govern the state from 1917 until 1944, when it merged with the Democrats to create the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, the only state party in the nation that acknowledges farmers and workers in its name. Farmer laborites challenged economic inequality and monopoly power. Although many of its more sweeping reforms were blocked, Farmer Labor Party achievements ranged from founding state parks to implementing public relief programs and a progressive income tax. The farmer labor movement had a national impact too, prompting federal agriculture, workplace, and unemployment policies. Farmer labor principles continue to influence Minnesota's civic culture. An educated citizenry, strong voter participation, social movement activism, and a belief in government for the public good.
How did the movement grow and bridge economic, ethnic, and urban-rural divides among its members? And how do the farmer labor rights goals and struggles parallel challenges we face today? Looking at the lives of individuals involved in the farmer labor movements helps us answer these questions.
From the packing plant in Austin to the co-ops in Fargo, in the city and the country, wherever you may go.
Through the wild and windy weather, through the sun and sleet and rain,
Comes a whistling through the country, this farmer labor train.
Socialist William Mahoney edited St. Paul's Union Advocate newspaper and led the labor assembly. He believed an independent party was the workers' best strategy for changing society's unfair income distribution.
We must organize the workers into a solid economic and political force.
Susie Stageberg was born on an Iowa farm. She taught in country classrooms and Sunday school. Her Lutheran faith informed her political activism. As editor of the Red Wing Organized Farmer, Susie had credibility with rural voters. She persuaded farm activists to join workers in the new political movement, earning her the title Mother of the Farmer Labor Party.
We all prosper or suffer together. Workers and farmers need a new political party with a program and candidates all our own.
In 1924, Mahoney and Stageberg brought together a coalition unique in the history of American politics. More than a political party, the Farmer Labor Association was the grassroots core of the movement, designed to educate, organize, and represent the two great producing classes, the farmers and the workers.
She's rolling from the farm fields onto Red Wings River shore.
The association, through its member organizations and local clubs, developed platforms reflecting farmers' and workers' interests. Then they made sure their elected Farmer Labor Party officials honored those platforms.
Members of other political groups, including populists, socialists, and communists, joined the movement, often debating and sometimes clashing over its direction.
The direct model and catalyst for the movement was the Nonpartisan League that arose in the neighboring state of North Dakota.
when the lawyer hangs around while the butcher cuts a pound, the farmer is the one who feeds them all.
Wheat farmers in North Dakota could not make ends meet.
The flour milling industry was really guided by and directed by, and all the profits were funneled toward these Minneapolis companies. And that left these farmers in the lurch.
Squeezed between high loan rates from commercial banks and low payments for their crops from grain elevators and flour mills, farmers suffered poverty, and they faced losing their land.
Then they take them by the hand, and they lead them from the land, and the middleman's the one who gets it all.
Flax grower Arthur C. Townley and others convinced thousands of North Dakota farmers that it was time to elect their own political leaders. Farm families organized the Nonpartisan League in 1915 and nominated candidates to run for state offices within the Republican Party. By 1918, North Dakotans elected a Nonpartisan League governor and a majority in the legislature, and these leaders made good on their platform. They established a state-owned flour mill, grain elevator, and bank, enterprises that still operate today. The movement's focus on economic issues brought people together across powerful racial and ethnic divides. African American farmers became active members of the League. Labor and civil rights leader Nellie Stone Johnson was born to William Allen, a farmer, and Gladys Allen, a teacher, in 1905. She grew up on farms in Minnesota's Dakota and Pine counties.
My dad was a member of the Nonpartisan League. I was very familiar with the League and read many of the papers. I was 13 doing the distribution of literature to the farmers. I just propped the material up on the horse's saddle horn so I could read it.
Nonpartisan League gains inspired organizing among farmers in northwestern Minnesota and beyond. Their goals and successes attracted workers in cities too, despite traditional tension between urban labor and rural farmers.
What brings these two groups together is a streetcar strike that occurs in St. Paul in 1917. When no one else stood with Minneapolis and St. Paul workers during the streetcar strike, the Nonpartisan League stood behind them, donated funds, and spoke out on their behalf. And they began to see that their interests were really not so different after all.
As a marker of this growing cooperation, the farmer-oriented Nonpartisan League moved its headquarters to St. Paul in 1917. There, William Mahoney saw that the League model could enable organized workers to strengthen their political power too. He founded the Workers' Nonpartisan Political League. Like the Farmers' NPL, it wasn't a party, but a member-driven organization pushing for social change. It soon had thousands of members across Minnesota. Members of both branches of the Nonpartisan League nominated the progressive congressman from Little Falls, Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., as their candidate to challenge the incumbent Governor Burnquist in the Minnesota Republican primary. In the joint rally that followed, farmers and workers celebrated. League President Arthur C. Townley addressed the final session.
Farmers of Minnesota, is there any hatred in your heart toward organized labor? No! Those of you who pledge allegiance to the workers of the city will stand.
Thousands of Minnesota farmers jumped to their feet.
Workers of the city, if you likewise pledge your allegiance to the farmers of Minnesota, please stand.
Immediately, the rest of the 7,000 people in the auditorium were on their feet. Hats sailed through the air. Men and women cried. The cheers were tumultuous. The growing power of a united rural and urban working people's movement was viewed as a threat by big business and the party in power. League organizing took place during the height of U.S. involvement in World War I. The Republican administration, aided by the Home Guard and Main Street Patriots, carried on a campaign of harassment, branding both farm and labor militants as disloyal and jailing leaders for sedition.
There were people hung in effigy, and there were actual people tarred and feathered. It was a violent campaign.
In 1917, the legislature set up a special Minnesota Commission of Public Safety to suppress dissent.
Members of the Public Safety Commission who directed it were mostly corporate leaders from Minneapolis. They saw this as an opportunity to extend their power across the state and deal with a number of the challenges to their power in Minneapolis through violating what today we would see as basic civil liberties.
John F. McGee became de facto leader of the commission that targeted groups well beyond opponents of the war.
The League worker is a traitor. Where we made our mistake is in not establishing a firing squad in the first days of the war. We should now get busy and have that firing squad working overtime. The disloyal element in Minnesota is largely among the German and Swedish people.
The Public Safety Commission, in trying to take care of its perceived enemies across the state that brings farmers and laborers together, they all experience this repression.
That really did cause people to think about where their political loyalties really ought to lie and who's going to be on their side.
Strong hand, son of the soil, he is toiling hard from the cradle.
Miners on the Iron Range had experienced repression for decades. The Steel Trust sought to drive wedges between ethnic groups to prevent workers from organizing unions. The repercussions for pro-labor views or actions were severe, as miners, like French Corsican immigrant John Bernard, learned.
In those days, the wages were mighty low. The miners were getting $2.10 a day for 10 hours work. So I would say to these miners, why don't we have a union here? But they had stool pigeons in the mines. That's how I was blacklisted. I was sent home.
Finns were especially engaged in organizing the mines and especially targeted for their activism.
The Finns were largely blacklisted from the mines. The thing was, you bought your food and your stuff from the company store, and the company store wouldn't give you credit if you were on strike. As a result of that, the cooperative movement grew by leaps and bounds after the 1907 strike, because this was a place that was geared for workers and that would support workers no matter what.
Consumer cooperatives became an important part of life on the range. The Northern Cooperative League, rooted in the radical Finnish tradition, operated dozens of co-op stores in the region.
Everybody really relied on the co-op. The whole feeling was if your community is strong, you can survive. If you're on your own as an individual, you're probably not going to make it.
It's making sure that we own our community and that that community serves the people of the community, not corporate interests or someone else.
While mining communities supported consumer co-ops, farmers turned to producer co-ops. By jointly owning and operating storage and processing facilities, farmers could reduce costs and keep a larger portion of the income their produce earned.
Farmers felt they were getting ripped off on quality, quantity, or price. They took it in their own hands, formed a co-op to get a fair shake.
Dad became one of the charter members of the Twin Cities Milk Producers Association, set up to counteract the middleman. With all the cheating going on, it didn't take much to organize those dairy farmers.
Rural producer co-ops and consumer co-ops in towns and cities multiplied and formed alliances. The New York Times reported that Minnesota had more co-ops than any other state, a distinction it still holds today. Co-ops became a critical strand of the Farmer Labor Coalition, some as organizational members of the association and as the source of ideas for the collectivist ideology of the movement.
There is power in the band of working folk when they stand hand in hand. That's a power.
Duluth was a labor town. It had one of the strongest labor movements in the country. And then the Steel Trust arrived and gradually crushed the labor movement. And so in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, there was the crushing and then the beginning of a resistance and fight back.
I grew up in Duluth, up in the hills, a community we called Little Jerusalem. There was an enormous amount of anti-Semitism. The first time they called me a sheenie, they made me a communist.
Discrimination came not only from neighborhood kids. Irene's revered third-grade teacher told her class that undesirables from other countries were a blight on America.
From that time on, I never accepted authority unless I tested it in the crucible of my own experience. Well, it was only one short step there from being conscious of my oppression as a Jew, as a girl, to being conscious of the oppression of blacks. Right after World War I, 3 blacks were hanged from a pole in Duluth on First Street because they were accused of raping a woman in the circus. That made a tremendous impact on me.
Irene became an organizer and writer, supporting farmer labor ideals. She was not alone in her outrage over the social order. Voters took major steps toward reversing corporate dominance of Minnesota politics.
1918 was kind of a pivotal year. People launched the Duluth Working Men's Party. A railroad engineer, Congressman Carves, was elected to represent Duluth in Congress. And that was the beginning of the farmer labor movement in Duluth.
She's rolling to Duluth and all along Superior Shore. It's a long time we've been waiting, now she's whistling round the bend, rolling into Congress on that farmer labor train.
The movement gained ground in elections across the state, too. Although nonpartisan League candidate Lindbergh lost the Republican primary to Governor Burnquist, the coalition stayed together and won a strong foothold in the legislature. The 1918 campaign encouraged farmers and trade unionists to build a new, independent political organization. Over the next 6 years, the 2 nonpartisan leagues came together with other progressive groups to form the Independent Farmer Labor Association, the educational and organizational center of the movement. The electoral arm, the Farmer Labor Party, grew larger than the Democrats and won more offices every election.
Every man now has the ballot, none you know have we. But we have brains and we can use them just as well as he.
In 1922, 2 years after women got the right to vote, union organizer and farmer laborite Myrtle Kane was was among the first of 4 women elected to the Minnesota legislature.
I introduced the first equal rights for women law to be introduced in any state legislature. These discriminations by race and sex all along the line should be done away with once and for all.
Kane also pioneered a successful bill to challenge the Ku Klux Klan, making it a misdemeanor for members of groups to conceal their identities in public with masks or robes. The legislation was the first anti-masking bill ever passed in the nation. 15 other states followed suit. The success and inclusiveness of the farmer labor movement flowed from the organization's framework.
What the Farmer Labor Party and Farmer Labor Association understood was this idea that in order to have an ongoing successful movement, you need to have 3 things. One is you needed to have a clear vision and program that you are working toward that'll actually make a difference in working people's lives and farmers' lives, and a set of values that underlies that program, primarily the idea of solidarity. Second, we need to have grassroots organizing year-round. And then thirdly, you need to have a political vehicle, a party. So the party is based on the organizing and party are all about the vision and the platform. Those 3 parts of the triangle actually really, to me, constitute what was a unique contribution to the farmer labor movement. It had a strategy of change.
I don't want your millions, mister.
The Depression both undermined the lives of millions and fueled hopes and militant action to create a new society.
All I want is the right to live, mister. Give me back my job again.
While much of the country was spinning in confusion, Minnesota's farmer labor movement was ready to respond quickly to the crisis of the Depression with an organization, a program, and tested leadership. In 1930, voters elected a substantial farmer labor delegation to the State House of Representatives, and they made the charismatic Floyd B. Olson governor.
The Farmer Labor Party does not wish to confiscate the property of anyone. What we want is to create an economic system so that we can produce enough wealth to satisfy the needs of all the people. We want every man, woman, and child in the United States to have enough to eat. We want every man, woman, and child to have a decent home to live in and decent clothing to wear.
What had appeared radical in the 1920s seemed like kind of the lifesaver in the 1930s. I mean, there was real doubt that capitalism was even going to survive with 25–30% unemployment.
The contrast between the response to the Depression offered by the traditional parties versus the farmer laborites was clear in a 1932 gubernatorial debate.
The state and national governments have engaged in a wild orgy of spending. I pledge to cut every appropriation 20%.
The present administration has lacked the courage and foresight to cut expenses. All I hear people talking about is their rising taxes.
I disagree that people are only talking of taxes. The people of this nation today are talking mostly about eating. And the farmers are talking about getting the cost of production for their crops.
We're going to go to the Capitol and we're going to change state policy. We're going to talk about food, schooling, healthcare, and all of these things emerge through farmer labor organizing. And it also, I think, opened up all of these opportunities for women to be much more politically active and much more visible.
There is power, working women, working men, when they stand hand in hand.
From its very inception, the founders of the party believed in the equality of women. They believed in and spoke out for equal pay, which is way ahead of their time.
The association adopted a quota, unheard of at the time, 1 woman to every 2 men on the state committee. Women developed their own organization within the association, the Women's Federation. Federation women battled against discriminatory wage scales. They took on the relief department in Minneapolis when it refused to hire young married women. The Federation took on the Farmer Labor Association too. It advocated for policies that made family living conditions and fair access to relief of equal importance with workplace issues.
Touch the toil and sorrow in the soil where the greenbacks never grow on what I borrowed.
The farmer labor movement also supported community efforts to relieve the rural economic crisis. In southwestern Minnesota, farms boasted fertile earth that produced plentiful harvests and well-fed pigs and cattle. World War I brought high crop and livestock prices. Land values and interest rates shot up too. After the war ended, demand for farmers' products and the prices they could get for them crashed. But the high rates on loans they'd taken on in the boom years stayed the same.
If you incur a debt, let's say corn is 80 cents a bushel, and you try to pay for it when it is 2 cents a bushel, it doesn't make any difference how hard you work. You can't do it. And farmers were losing their farms.
Since 1914, the Bush family had farmed a 300-acre homestead southeast of Wilmer. John Bush was all too familiar with the economic squeeze farmers faced.
To Governor Olson and John Bush, dear sir, I'm writing to you on account of our condition. We haven't even writing paper to write on. Now we've got to have work or some way to keep our family alive. It hurts to hear the children cry for bread and you haven't got it to give them. We need help immediately. Trusting, I am yours truly, Mrs. E.W. Pagel.
The Pagels were among thousands of farmers and rural workers who looked to John Bush and the Farm Holiday Association for help. In 1932, John was elected state president of the new organization, an offshoot of the Farmers Union. The Farm Holiday Association advocated nonviolent collective action to save family farms. Members demanded that prices for agricultural goods be set above the cost of producing them. Their first tactic was to strike, withholding dairy, livestock, and crops from the market to boost prices.
They dumped their milk, they wouldn't sell their milk. They tried to block the trucks that were hauling livestock to the South St. Paul. They'd throw a spiked plank across the highway.
But coordinating thousands of independent farmers, desperate for income from perishable foodstuffs, proved daunting.
The strike had fizzled, the strike had failed, and they called that off, and they concentrated on the mortgage moratoriums and preventing foreclosures after that.
Come along, all workers come along, help the union to grow strong.
While the Farm Holiday Association was organizing for fair prices from companies that process animals they raised, workers inside the Hormel meatpacking plant were building their own movement. Frank Ellis led the drive to unionize the Austin, Minnesota plant. His whole life had prepared him for the role.
Hell, I belonged to the Cook Waiters and Waitress Union. Then I joined several different unions, and if there was a union, I joined it because I'd learned that in early life, you know, I believed in it.
Frank's father was a farmer. While plowing, he suffered a serious injury and infection that paralyzed one of his feet. Unable to farm, he went to work for a Swift & Company meatpacking plant.
A grease pipe busted above him, and he started to jump out from under that grease pipe, and his foot slipped and he fell into a sewer there and broke that bum leg all to pieces, and they had to have it cut off, and that killed him. That's all there was to it. No compensation of any kind. I went to work at Hormel's over here in 28, down at Austin. I run a gang there at Hormel's for 5 years.
The work had become short weeks, cut pay, and here comes the foreman to insist that you sign a card saying that you'll allow them to take money out of your pay to go to the community chest. And as the story is told, one of the workers said, they expect us to help the poor people. Well, we are the poor people. They started a sit-down strike, and they occupied the plant. This was in November of 1933.
It was the nation's first sit-down strike. Jay Hormel and other business leaders had been lobbying for Governor Olson to send the National Guard to Austin to open up the plant, citing chaos in the streets. Instead, Olson went to Austin to see the situation for himself. He saw disciplined, peaceful pickets surrounding the plant. He met with both sides at the Fox Hotel and mediated an end to the strike.
And at the end of 3 days, Jay Hormel gave in, and that union negotiated one of the most remarkable union contracts ever. They're going to get a stable wage every week, and they can't be laid off for 52 weeks. Needless to say, workers around the state of Minnesota and workers around the upper Midwest heard about this and were inspired by this. This was the breakthrough.
And we started organizing cooks, waiters, waitresses, bartenders, barmaids, and automobile workers and truck drivers and what have you. And we organized under the Independent Union of All Workers. And we got them organized solid, and when we were once organized, we were the power.
We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the union on.
The union staged sit-down strikes to organize meat packers and appliance manufacturing workers in Albert Lea, Minnesota. The inclusive unionizing model spread to Cedar Rapids, Mason City, and Omaha. This militant energy inspired activism in the Twin Cities, too.
We're gonna roll the union
Labor organizing ramped up in Minneapolis to challenge the U.S. capital of anti-unionism enforced by the Citizens Alliance.
The Citizens Alliance was begun shortly after the turn of the 20th century, primarily driven by big business, the banks in particular, and their goal was to keep unions out of Minneapolis.
In 1934, workers saw an opportunity to breach the wall of employers' refusal to recognize unions. The Teamsters called a massive trucker strike. Strikers fought Citizens Alliance members and police in hand-to-hand street battles. Police shot roving picketers. The violence cost 4 lives. The Olson Farmer Labor Administration aimed to keep order by detaining pickets and closing both the Citizens Alliance and strikers' headquarters. The strike was finally settled when, at the governor's urging, the Roosevelt administration intervened by threatening to call back federal loans made to Citizens Alliance banks. This strike, together with conflicts in California and Ohio, catalyzed pressure to pass the 1935 National Labor Relations Act. It made collective bargaining the law of the land. The Farm Holiday Association sent food to the striking workers. Nellie's father, William Allen, a member of the association, joined in the support.
The old man was bringing potatoes and rutabagas down to feed the Teamsters. I don't even remember how many truckloads he brought up.
Farmers also brought food to striking Strutware Knitting Company workers, the majority of them women.
Women at the factory who were not organized at all in the hosiery workers start to organize among themselves and come out on strike. And then the Teamsters basically halt all delivery to the factory. So the fact that the Farmer Labor Association is out there supporting what appears to be a relatively small strike of hosiery workers has a lot to do with their understanding of the strategic pressure points in the Minneapolis political economy, which will allow them to open the city up to union organization and to a much more progressive politics.
Nellie Allen had been fired in 1924 for talking about having a union at the elite Minneapolis Athletic Club, where she worked as the employee elevator operator. The climate for organizing had changed when she got her job back in 1934. She organized the workers who got on and off her elevator.
The corporate world, the power structure, looked around and saw the Farmer Labor Party taking one office after another. That played a role in helping us organize, that there was a political group of people supported by labor. The growing threat of a tight union organization made them treat us more carefully. We also made it clear that whites and blacks would be treated the same.
The workers joined the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union as Local 655. Nellie later used her union's position on the Central Labor Board to push for hiring black teachers in Minneapolis.
And Ellie was a very intense person, and usually what she said, these politicians went out and did.
While supporting union strikers and the Farmer Labor Coalition, the Farm Holiday Association was using its own collective tactics to halt foreclosures across the region.
And so they had what they call a penny auction. And they bid the stuff back in at pennies.
What am I bid for the cow? What am I bid for the cow?
5 cents for the cow.
And then they'd give it back to the farmer after that was done.
10 cents for the tractor.
But after a while, in certain counties like Swift County and Lockheed Parle County and places like that, there weren't that many sales held because the holiday had so much strength.
So, creditors began negotiating with the association instead of forcing families off their land. It was one thing to challenge the local sheriff's power, quite another to defy federal authorities, as the Farm Holiday Association did in Montevideo.
It was a day perfect for thrashing. But within a radius of 20 miles around Montevideo, there wasn't a thrashing rig going.
There was a scheduled foreclosure sale, and they shut down the thrashing and everybody went to town, crowded.
The town was full of people as far as South Dakota, Iowa, North Dakota, and the poor U.S. Marshal. Actually, I felt sorry for him. He had a bodyguard. He said, "I'm here with the judge's order in my pocket," and he patted his gun. When someone hit the marshal, I turned him around and I told him, "There's about 6,000 of us here. You don't need to do that." The marshal called the federal judge. The judge said, "You can't do this. It's illegal." Harry Hoagland says, "We understand that, but we're doing it." They stopped the foreclosure.
Just after that gathering, John Bush got a call from Governor Olson.
Governor Olson told me he had a call from the president. He called me to tell me specifically. He knows you and he thinks you're doing a tremendous job, but you can't buck the federal government. You're going to spend the rest of your life in the pen. Well, I said, "Now, Floyd, up till now, we've hurt no one. You'll put me in the pen if it takes 10,000, 100,000. It takes I don't know how many. I'm not going to stay there. If you want a civil war, if that's what you're aiming for, that's the way you'll get it."
Instead of arrests, the militant, unified actions of the Association on Farms and in a mass rally at the Minnesota Capitol gained a state foreclosure moratorium. And, at the urging of President Roosevelt, Congress passed a law providing subsidies to farmers in exchange for cutting production.
We built dams and bridges by the score, just leaning on a shovel, and lots of housing for the poor.
Chester Watson was born on a farm near Aiken, Minnesota. He attended Carleton College and had formal training in music. He worked in Hollywood as a film actor and singer. Chester also took a job in California as a probation officer.
I became discouraged because society was creating more poverty, or through poverty was creating more delinquents than social workers could take care of. And so I quit the job. I had a hard time making my living back there, and I can remember going for several days on the road without having anything to eat. And of course, this was my first taste of being unemployed.
Chester returned to Minnesota, to Rochester, where he worked as a social worker, was active in the Farmer Labor Association, and ran for Congress. He was fired for helping get relief for wives and families of men who had been jailed.
And it was during this time that unemployment got worse. And we'd have boys up at the state reformatory at St. Cloud for stealing a few chickens from some neighbors in order to go to a dance on a Saturday night, and cases of people stealing hay to feed their cattle.
Chester was recruited as president of the Minnesota Workers Alliance and devoted himself to the cause of the unemployed.
We had day-to-day struggles of people coming into the office or coming to meetings, telling us what their situation was, where they had been denied relief, medical care, and we would take them to the relief office and see if we couldn't get this case straightened out. We had close to 40,000 people join the Workers Alliance in the first year that I was president of that organization. We went to businessmen and we'd say, "Look here, Mr. Merchant, we want you to sign this, asking for more WPA jobs from Congress. If we can get work and are paid for this work, we will be able to pay our bills at the grocery store, to the dentist and the doctor, and we'll be able to pay our rent." And so we had merchant after merchant that would say, "Yes, I want you for customers, and I'm very glad to sign this for you."
The Workers' Alliance kept the unemployed associated with the labor movement and brought together white workers and black workers in a common struggle.
When the earth is owned by labor and there's joy and peace for all in the commonwealth of toil that is to be.
By the 1934 Farmer Labor State Convention, the connection between grassroots activism with the responsive government bore fruit. Floyd Olson fired up the convention when he declared,
"Now, I am frank to say that I am not a liberal. I enjoy working on a common basis with liberals for their platforms, but I am not a liberal. I am what I want to be. I am a radical. I want, however, an orderly, a sane, and a constructive change."
Then we'll sing one song of the workers' commonwealth, full of beauty, full of love and health.
The following day, Farmer Labor Convention delegates passed the famous Cooperative Commonwealth Platform, a Magna Carta of American left-wing politics.
It was the most radical sort of platform ever passed by a major political party. Its preamble said capitalism has failed and we must replace it with a system called a cooperative commonwealth. It called for public ownership of major banks and utilities and other things, not for total public ownership.
For many middle-of-the-road farmer laborites, the platform simply went too far. Agricultural co-ops were one thing, but the state ownership section seemed to threaten private ownership itself. Olson won the next election for a third term as governor, but the Farmer Labor Party lost its majority in the state house, slowing the pace of progressive governmental reforms. As Olson decided not to seek a fourth term as governor, delegates at the 1936 Farmer Labor Convention endorsed him for the United States Senate. However, Olson was gravely ill. On August 22, 1936, he died at Rochester's Mayo Clinic of stomach cancer. Many Minnesotans felt a personal connection to Floyd Olson. 200,000 grieving people filed past the much-beloved governor's coffin in silent tribute. Elmer Benson, a prairie populist from Appleton, Minnesota, won the 1936 Farmer Labor endorsement for governor, edging out Hjalmar Peterson, the former lieutenant governor who became governor upon Olson's death. Benson was a favorite of party progressives. Sympathy for Governor Olson, the popularity of President Roosevelt, and support for the New Deal policies implemented by the farmer laborites brought landslide victories for the party. In addition to Benson's win, the Farmer Labor Party elected 5 congressmen, a U.S. senator, and a working majority in the State House of Representatives, its most impressive victory. The margin of the electoral wins enabled the Benson administration to put movement ideas into practice and expand support for unions and progressive farm groups. The victories demonstrated the farmer labor movement's appeal across the urban-rural divide and across traditional ethnic divisions.
John T. Bernard ran for office in 1936 on the farmer labor ticket. He ran for 8th District Congress, and he was an immigrant. When John T. Bernard won that election, he won 70% of the vote, and he beat a Democratic and a Republican candidate. He won across all ethnic groups, and that had never happened before that.
If you want to join a union, step in and come along. We'll all be glad to have you. We're many 1,000 strong. Join the CIO.
The Benson administration came into office as the newly formed Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, focused on organizing long unrepresented workers. A cascade of campaigns to create new unions was underway. Governor Benson and the Farmer Labor Party were ready and eager to support this union tide in Minnesota. The solidarity between farmers and workers emboldened them to stand up to some of their most powerful opponents in northern Minnesota, the lumber companies.
There's lumberjacks from White Earth and folks in factories,
garment workers in Minneapolis
and cooks in Albert Lea.
White Earth Ojibwe organizer Fred LaCour was elected president of the Minnesota Timber Workers Union. He led it through the first of 2 strikes in 1937.
We are the Minnesota Lumberjacks, the most exploited group of workers in the state. The lumber barons of the Northwest have dealt with us as ruthlessly as they laid waste our great natural resource, the Minnesota forests.
Having witnessed massive fires on cut-over timber areas, farmer laborites saw the need to protect the land. That impulse of sustainable stewardship became an important strand of farmer labor policy. A major plank of the Cooperative Commonwealth Platform stated the necessity of safeguarding the land for everyone. Farmer labor Senator Shipstead co-authored a bill preserving the Boundary Waters area, the nation's first congressional wilderness preservation statute. 16 state parks were established during farmer labor administrations, and the Department of Conservation was founded.
The lumber companies have taken to contracting out lumbering. So you've got small operators working on thin margins.
Men are housed in these big camps in the woods. There are several hundred of these camps across northern Minnesota. And their complaints are not only about their wages and their hours and their dangers on the jobs, but they're also very much about the living conditions.
Crowded bunks with no ventilation, no showers, straw to sleep on, infected with bugs. So the lumberjacks organize.
They had found a voice in the CIO. All of a sudden, thousands of them rose out of the camps, just like the trees out of the woods they came, walking trees.
Irene was working at the Paul Law office when Joe Liss, a timber workers union steward, walked in.
And he says, "Why are you sitting at that bourgeois typewriter and doing this bourgeois work? You belong down at strike headquarters. We need someone to help us. We don't have a stenographer. We don't have anything. And here you are. Shame on you." He didn't even know me, you know. And so I said to Hank, "Hank, they need me down in strike headquarters." He said, "Well, then go." So I not only took away his secretary, I took away his typewriter.
Irene traveled around the camps, talking to timber workers in mess halls and bunkhouses, writing down the stories they told her.
Such a lot of devils, that's what the papers say.
Because the mainstream press had this anti-worker approach to covering the strike, they needed to reach people directly, and they also needed to keep their own members informed about what was going on. They created a newspaper called The Timber Worker.
Irene Paul and her cousin, Sam Davis, wrote and edited the paper, which later became the regional CIO newspaper, Midwest Labor.
Farmers had also been harmed by the timber companies. They cut down all the forests, and then they resold that cut-over land to people who came and settled as farmers, only to discover that clearing all those stumps and the sort of acidic soils of a pine forest did not make for very good growing conditions. And so by 1937, a lot of people were losing their farms, unable to even make a living. They were really struggling, and so they saw the timber workers' strike as their own struggle. And they started going and just reaching out to farmer labor clubs that were organized across the state to tell their story and to ask for support, and they overwhelmingly got it. All of these letters that pour into the governor's office.
Governor Benson made state relief available to strikers and opened up the Duluth Armory to those who had lost their lumber camp housing.
Elmer Benson sent in a truckload of grapefruit to striking lumberjacks, and also used troops to protect the strikers. I mean, this is amazing. This is the United States of America, where the Army always intervenes on the side of the companies and suppresses the labor movement. And here the governor is sending in troops to protect the workers? Wow.
The timber workers won their 2 strikes.
They say they'll win the strike or put the bosses on the bum.
In Albert Lea, Benson intervened personally during the American Gas Machine Company strike. He waded into a crowd of 2,000 labor supporters, confronting machine gun-armed law enforcement and deputies. He ordered an end to the standoff. Then he convened an all-night meeting to negotiate an end to the strike. What made Benson beloved in labor-friendly cities and northern Minnesota made enemies among big business.
But the banks are made of marble with a guard at every door.
On April 5, 1937, Fred LaCour, Chester Watson, and leaders of other farmer labor association groups addressed more than 1,000 people at the state capitol. The crowd came to lobby legislators to pass Governor Benson's relief bill. 200 protesters peacefully occupied the Senate chamber overnight. Governor Benson addressed the people's lobby.
The great majority of the people, 95% or more, are ordinary, plain, common folks. These are the people that are producing the wealth, keeping our government going. And if we would use our common sense, we would make this country the finest, happiest place in the world to live in.
At the request of Governor Benson, the occupiers left the chamber the next morning. Republicans felt the people's lobby had gone too far and called for Benson's impeachment. While the Farmer Labor Party was at the height of its power, many Minnesotans felt excluded or alienated by Benson's staunchly progressive approach. Business owners complained.
Floyd Olson used to say all those things, but this son of a bitch Benson really means them.
Divisions that had been festering inside the Farmer Labor Association now burst out into the open. Especially damaging was the conflict between the AFL craft unions that had been at the core of the movement and the emerging industrial unions organized by the CIO. Governor Benson strongly supported the new movement, causing resentment among old AFL allies like William Mahoney. Conflict with left-wing members led Mahoney to leave the Farmer Labor Party he helped create. Communists had shunned the Farmer Labor Party, and at times they were barred as members. But through most of the movement's history, communists worked alongside socialists, populists, and other members of the coalition to improve the lives of working people. By 1935, the on- and off-again relationship of communists within the Farmer Labor Party was reset. To fight racism and fascism, cooperation with progressives became official communist international policy in what became known as the Popular Front. Former Governor Hjalmar Peterson announced his intention to challenge Benson in the 1938 Farmer Labor primary. The themes he sounded served both himself and the Republicans and appealed to a growing Silver Shirts fascist movement in Minnesota.
I abhor the communist teachings of overthrow of government by revolution and the destruction of the church. I would rather be defeated without the support of this un-American element than elected with it. I will not bargain with those seeking to lead us from the principles of our party and our departed leaders. I will not deal with men who do not recognize that Christianity is the foundation of civilization.
The Republican Party had come around, and so by 1938 they were recognizing the reality of the problems that the Farmer Labor Party had been addressing and even accepting some of the solutions that the Farmer Labor Party had been offering.
The Republican Party waged two campaigns in 1938. One, led by gubernatorial candidate Harold Stassen himself, took the high road. The other, not acknowledged but not repudiated by the candidate, plumbed the depths of anti-communism and anti-Semitism.
The Stassen campaign was saying that Benson was run by international Jewish bankers.
Benson lost the 1938 election, as did many farmer laborites, including Congressman John Bernard.
Now, after that election, there's a three-way fight. There's the Republicans, there's the Farmer Labor Party, and the Democrats. And the Republicans are the biggest vote getters of those three camps. So that leads then to the idea that the Democrats and the Farmer Labor Party should unite so that they can win the elections against the Republicans.
Farmer labor candidates for statewide office continued to outpoll the Democrats, but were defeated by the Republicans in 1940 and 42. With the U.S. entry into World War II and an improved economy, popular support declined for the Farmer Labor Party's militant anti-monopoly policies, and the ideological gap with the Democrats narrowed as the party had become more progressive through FDR's New Deal platform. Farmer laborite Nellie Stone Johnson met Democrat Hubert Humphrey on campus when she attended the University of Minnesota. They became friends and allies. Both sought to bring their two parties together.
But a lot of farmer laborites and Democrats were bitterly opposed to combining the two parties.
And it was a tough negotiation because there was suspicion between the two groups. Finally, in the spring of 1944, fusion was effected. And both sides thought, when the agreement was made, that they'd be able to really capture control of the merged party.
Political unity within the DFL did not survive past the end of World War II. Farmer labor opposition to the economic and Cold War policies of the Truman administration met head-on with the corporate liberalism of the Democrats. A struggle for control of the new party raged over the next 4 years. The farmer labor branch of the DFL lost much of its influence. Ultimately, the Democratic wing soundly defeated the former farmer laborites. By May of 1948, Marion LeSueur had enough. She resigned her post as vice chairwoman of the party, spelling out her reasons in a letter to the party chair.
Why should we go further into an insane struggle for power, pitting neighbor against neighbor over false issues and name-calling? The Democratic Party has become a part of the bipartisan party of the monopolies, which are the enemies of the people everywhere.
Liberal concerns about Soviet strength and domestic subversion, coupled with conservative resistance to social change, fueled the anti-communist suspicions, which led to McCarthyism. Some farmer laborites suffered serious consequences, questioned before a congressional committee, fired, blacklisted, or harassed by the FBI. The fear of being branded a communist or a communist sympathizer discouraged many from passing on their farmer labor experience to following generations.
Living memory seems to have been severed.
The Farmer Labor Party ceased to be a separate political force after the DFL merger. But progressive ideas, policies, and institutions established by the farmer labor movement are still strong in Minnesota today.
They called us wild-eyed Bolsheviks. Starry-eyed radicals was the kindest thing they said. Never, it's impossible. This is utterly impossible. You know, Social Security, unemployment insurance. You see how the impossible becomes possible.
How do we stand up to corporate entities that want to continue to extract and do with our allies, the working people of the state?
I got the same pay that the men got, and it's because of things Aunt Nellie had fought for to make those unions happen.
Grassroots politics really made the difference, shaped the policy, and changed the world, at least in Minnesota.
We'll make America land all can love. Organize her, unionize her, make the bright star of right shine above. Make the railroads and the factories and the farmlands all our own. We'll make America our own sweet home. We'll make America our own sweet home. Thank you.
So if you have questions or comments, there's 84 of us on here. It would be a little wild and woolly to just shout them out, but please, let's start out by typing things into the chat. Maybe while people are thinking of questions, Anna, Tom, Randy, anything you want to add after we've seen the film? Tom, you're muted.
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Well, I was just saying that I was trying to find Randy. I just like to say it was a wonderful experience making the film with Randy and Anna. It was fun traveling around, doing those interviews. I don't know how many meetings we would have. So I'd recommend to all the listeners tonight, if you want to have a good time and a creative time, make a documentary film. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And I also just enjoyed collaborating with so many people. And as I said, there are hundreds, and please check out the list of credits at the FLEC website. But I just wanted to thank a few people who were involved with us, some all the way since 2014. Howard Kling, formerly of Labor Education Service, did a lot of shooting for it, and a lot of reading of scripts. Jeff Coffer shot a lot of the landscapes and the drone shots. John Aker has been working with us for years to create all those animations, and created a lot of visuals in the last 2 weeks before the deadline when the show had to be done. Jim May, who works at Sound 80, also for the last several years, found actors and recorded it, did the sound mix, composed and recorded music for it. And all of those folks helped me to edit the show down from 3 hours to the 57 minutes it is now. They all gave me, and Tom and Anna, honest feedback, and were especially important, I think. And Dan Chenard also arranged the music, gathered together the musicians, and they performed most of the music for the show that you just watched. And also Tom Beer, who has been writing all the checks and keeping track of the finances and some of the organizational things for FLEC. So again, there are easily 100 other people, but I just really wanted to mention them.
So one of the things we hope to do and involve others in is take the film around. There's so much emphasis today to the urban-rural split and the differences between us. And here is a time in Minnesota history where farmers and rural people and urban people work together. And that was, I think, part of our motivation. And so hopefully by showing this film and having discussions around the state, particularly in places where farmer labor history, some of which you saw in the film, was really an active part of their story, we can get some good conversations going about what are our common interests, what can we learn from this time when there was such great cooperation.
So you've actually anticipated one of the questions in the chat, which is, how do we rebuild relationships between farmers and workers today? I don't know, Anna, Randy, anything you want to add to Tom's vision of taking the film around and using it to generate conversations? Other ideas?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I think just talking to each other, it'd be great to be in Montevideo and hear what farmers today have to say about some of these things. And I just think we need to acknowledge some of the common issues. I think that's a big issue. And I think not only between farmers and workers, but as you saw with the unemployed and the Minnesota Workers Alliance, they were making common cause with small business owners too, supporting each other, and with the unemployed. So I think, Peter, in your interview, you talked about crossing boundaries. And I really think that's something we really need to think about and see how we can, listen to the other side. And I guess just the fact that it did happen should encourage us.
Yeah, good point.
It's been interesting. I've been doing some teaching of apprentices in the IBEW and in the Pipe Fitters Union. And I've been shocked at the lack of curiosity about why is the Democratic Party called the DFL in Minnesota. I mean, it's amazing what's not being taught in the schools, and so it just is a blur. Anna, I see you nodding. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's, one of the sections on the cutting floor of the film is a series of conversations we had with people at the state fair, actually, where we asked people, what do you know about the Farmer Labor Party? What do you know about this history? And do you know why it's called the Democratic Farmer Labor Party? We stood outside of the DFL building at the state fair, and yeah, it was really interesting to hear. Very few people had that knowledge, and yet people had a great awareness of how much bringing workers and farmers together is needed now. I mean, just as we're seeing here in the chat, it's a sense of urgency that's real, and I think people who don't know this history know the need for it.
It's so interesting to look at this movie this week, 2 days after the election. And I wonder if any of the three of you have thoughts about the election and how the history of the farmer labor movement provides a context, perhaps, for what we're seeing now in Minnesota, or only in its absence. I don't know.
Well, I was looking at just the urban-rural split in Minnesota and probably across the country, and so much of the Democratic farmer labor vote was concentrated in the Minneapolis, St. Paul cities and inner ring suburbs, and of course Duluth, little splotches of the range, although that's even changing a bit. And then these little centers around the state, oftentimes near some of the larger towns, and I'm guessing places where there was some labor presence. But I was kind of disheartened by that. Not discouraged, it made me more like there is a need to have these kind of conversations, to look at what common interests there can be and are, but not always realized. So I think one of the little pleas I want to put out is, I think we haven't talked much about it as a team, but my hope is that we can get some people together and get a kind of a flying squad of folks who want to show the film around the state and initiate conversations. It doesn't just have to be the three of us, God forbid, but but others, and maybe come up with some common questions that might be helpful and bring people together.
I think the farmer labor split certainly existed before the farmer labor movement started, and they brought them together. And another thing that impressed me was how bad things were. I was really nervous. I'm sure a lot of us were, leading up to this election, and we still haven't seen the end of threats of violence and so forth. But people were hung, tarred and feathered. Meetings were broken up. The mayor of New Ulm was taken out of office for being against the war. Civil rights and political violence were certainly part of the scene, and part of the point that was made was that people reacted against that. And that's part of what led to the growth of the Nonpartisan League and the farmer labor movement, was a reaction against that kind of extremism. Yeah. So that, knowing how bad things were, both scares me and encourages me, because it was transcended at least for a quarter of a century.
Thank you. So Will has raised his mechanical hand, and I want to respect his familiarity with Zoom etiquette. So Will, do you want to unmute and speak?
Hi, okay, everyone. So just joining from Australia today. Sorry, I'm just going to turn on my video. Okay, so yeah, just joining from Australia. I heard about this from a friend who lives up north in Cairns. I'm joining from Brisbane. My friend is from Minnesota and know her through just shared left-wing political activism. So I just, because I'm going to be heading to work shortly, I just wanted to ask a bit of questions just about how we can kind of translate these things into our kind of shared political settings, as far as the same sorts of issues having that growing urban rural split, and like how we kind of build that in the modern setting, how we can kind of stem that trend of left-wing politics increasingly being a thing of the big cities, and also how we can bring in Indigenous activism to that. I thought it was really cool that you got to hear Robin give an acknowledgement of country. That's something we also do. I'm joining from Turrbal and Yuggera land here today. So,
thank you. Thank you. Thoughts in response to our mate from Australia who's joined us?
I mean, I would say I think the heart of this film is about the movement built around an association and built around a set of relationships. And I think, one of the things that's a challenge that we continue to face is that the heart of movement building, the heart of change is in building relationships. And so that, it's hard work to do that. It's hard work for people with different interests in different, parts of the world and parts of the country, part of the state, to actually kind of make those connections and start to do, as Peter has talked about, break down those boundaries, break down those barriers, and cross over and say, hey, we do have these shared interests. We do have, shared enemies sometimes. And that I think is all kinds of organizing, I think, comes down to relationship building. And so that that's a general answer. And the hard work is how do we do that? Where do we start?
Things like this, us joining, getting to have a bit of chat, and I'd love to connect with you guys more and coordinate kind of stuff that we've got going on there, and hear more about what you guys have going on over in Minnesota.
Great.
Well, we'll stay in touch, hopefully, Will. And I do think, as several people have already suggested, this film itself can be a tool, can start conversations. And I hope that everybody who's watched it tonight will reach out and bring the film to your kid's school or to your community organization. Let's get these conversations going using the film as a focal point. I see that our old friend Manly Olson has raised his mechanical hand. Manly, I think you can unmute.
I might just before Manly speaks, I might just say a quick goodbye and thanks for hosting us, and love to be in touch with people here.
Thank you. You can reach out to the Eastside Freedom Library, and we stay connected with Randy and Anna and Tom, and maybe get a Zoom conversation going with a group of Australians who have similar concerns and interests. Let this be the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. I'm also quite keen to get some Canadians from the NDP involved as well. So.
Great. Thank you, Will. Stay well.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
My sister lives in Canberra.
Really?
Cool.
Yep. I think she's on this Zoom.
I think she is.
Yep.
Manley, are you able to unmute and ask your question or make?
It's not so much of a question as a comment. Looking at the election results, the metropolitan area, but as I looked at the other places that were Democratic, a lot of them were college towns. And it seems to me that and there was an interview on one of the channels on the 6 o'clock news of Northfield in terms of the percentage of Democratic votes coming out of Northfield, which has 2 colleges. So that gives me some optimism. But the concern I have is a lot of the research tends to show that young people are not interested in joining movements and so forth, that this isn't something that is really their thing. So while their hearts are in the right place, we've got to get their feet moving.
Well, that's thinking like an organizer, Manley. Thank you. Tom, go ahead.
I'm not so sure how true that research is. It seems like it's oftentimes those of us who get a little older bewail the lack of engagement of young people. And that's not necessarily always true. It may be for the moment, but yeah, hopefully films like this and discussion and interaction can turn that around pretty fast.
I mean, I haven't looked at research, but I worked at Labor Education Service, and there were many passionate and effective political young people in unions and other organizations who have given me a lot of hope. I don't know, I can't give you statistics, but I know that there are, Gen Zs and lots of other people that are out there right now. So,
Your hand is up.
So I see that our old friend Tom Beer has raised his mechanical hand. And I think, Tom, you can unmute and speak, please.
Yes, I'd just like to interject a practical matter. I think one person in the chat asked about how they could find out more about the availability of the film. We do have the Farmer Labor Education Committee can make available the full disc of the showing. And if anyone is interested in that, along with Tom O'Connell's ask of people that might be interested in helping to get this film out, I will put my email address in the chat, and people can contact me for a disc.
It's also on the screen at the moment, Tom.
Yeah.
Your email address.
All right. Would it be helpful if I also put my email in the chat, Peter?
Sure.
All right. I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
And I see that Senator Sandy Pappas has raised her hand. Sandy,
hi everyone. Hi, I'm just off the campaign trail, so I just wanted to comment on what you've been talking about. That I did find that a lot of the volunteers who are used to volunteering are aging out. And so we really had a shortage of volunteers. We didn't have younger generations stepping up. And the young people who were engaged were either on campuses doing campus work, or they were paid. And I think that young people tend to feel, I'm not sure if this is true, but I felt like to me that, being active on social media was enough for them, and that they weren't really out doing the kind of the door-to-door canvassing unless they were on a paid team. So, I mean, I think we're going to continue to run into a shortage of volunteers, maybe more union organizing, like in unusual places like Starbucks and Amazon will get more young people engaged, but I'm not seeing them yet in politics stepping up.
Thank you. Are there anyone want to react to Sandy or other comments or questions out there?
Well, I appreciated her addition to the conversation, and also want to acknowledge that Sandy was one of the legislators early on as a DFLer who was, before actually she got elected, who was interested in this farmer labor history and curious about the DFL before she ever ran, and ran as an endorsed farmer labor.
We had the Farmer Labor Association, Tom.
Yeah.
And I was co-chair of the St. Paul chapter.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I think several of the comments in the chat take us back to your choice to title this film The Farmer Labor Movement, and to see all of the organizations and kinds of organizations that you bring to life in the film. And it's interesting to think about the range of organizations that exist today. The Fight for 15, worker centers like Setul and Awood, that there are other organizations in the movement besides unions per se and political parties per se. And I think that part of what we need to do is figure out the ways that people are already organized and how we can then bring those organizations together.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think part of the farmer labor story was it was more than a political party. And we tried to make the film, as I was watching it again, a lot of it, there's hardly any mention of electoral politics. It's about this organizing that's happening among rural people, farmers, labor, unemployed, and then how the Farmer Labor Party was based on a year-round association of people that were meeting and discussing, and these organizations that were affiliated. And that there is a kind of informal within the DFL. There's an open caucus system, and there are people who organize in their unions and in their neighborhoods who may gravitate to the DFL, but it's not necessarily a formal relationship. And maybe there shouldn't be. Maybe that's just not the way things work today. But there was back in the day. People didn't separate so much the what we call community organizing and electoral organizing.
I think that also there was definitely this idea that it was more than just elections. I mean, when FDR got elected, I don't know if this is apocryphal, but he said, "You've elected me, now make me do the right thing." And so those penny auctions, the massive demonstrations you saw in the photographs at Minneapolis City Hall, et cetera, all those kinds of actions really put pressure on elected leaders. And I think it's also interesting that the Farmer Labor Party never held the Senate, the state Senate. They sometimes held the House, but not through all of Olson's term, and yet they were able to get a lot of progressive legislation through. And I'd like to know more about the details of that. But they were able to form these coalitions, and perhaps it was the circumstances of the Great Depression, of course, but they were able to get some of this stuff through with a Republican Senate. So that's encouraging.
There's certainly some interesting comments in the chat about ways to get more young people involved, or that people have had the experience in this last election go round of being with 20 and 30 somethings who are pounding the pavement and out doing door knocking and organizing. And
good.
Well, Robin, are you there?
I am here, Peter.
You're back. Your
I'm
modem
back.
came back to life, or so? Do you want to show the credit slide? please.
Yeah, these are the organizations that funded the show.
And 76 individuals and organizations.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'm fond of saying that rebuilding the labor movement is a labor-intensive project. And so there's a way that the means and the ends become woven together. So we're at about the end of our expected time. We're actually a wee bit over. Any last comment from Tom, Randy, or Anna?
Well, I'd like to thank Peter and the Eastside Freedom Library folks for hosting this. But more than that, I think is an example of a space where these kind of discussions can happen, and that organizing and change is about not only the mechanics, but also the exploration of ideas and the creation of, solidarities, and that the Eastside Freedom Library is just a wonderful gift. So thank you to all the folks that make that possible.
Thank you, Tom.
That's for sure.
And again, the recording of tonight's film and the conversation will be posted on the YouTube page of the Ramsey County Historical Society and the Eastside Freedom Library. So Randy, it's mostly Randy that I've spoken with about the film, and he does not see the film as a commodity. He does not see it as a commercial product to sell, though, as Tom Beer has shown us, you can purchase a copy of the DVD if you're still, into the older technologies. But the film is readily available for any of you to take the initiative and share it with people in your family or any organizations you're in. I just want to say, I think that the use of music, the use of cartoons, and the use of actor voiceovers, that you've made a really beautiful film. And the story, of course, I find compelling, but the way you're telling the story in the film makes it very accessible. And I'm sure, Randy, it was hard to cut it from 3 hours to 1 hour, but and we may all want to see what got cut, but I'm thankful that you got this version in just under an hour. So I want to thank the three of you and thank the 76 individuals and organizations that also helped to make it possible. And thank everybody for joining us tonight. And the magic of Zoom, so that we didn't have to face the rapidly plummeting temperatures. And I'm afraid I'll get to the Eastside Freedom Library tomorrow, and there might be some angry notes on the door of people who thought that we were going to do this in person. But I think this has been marvelous. I again want to thank our friends at Ramsey County Historical Society and Roseville Library for also building audience and maintaining this History Revealed program. So thank you, everyone. Stay warm, stay well, stay active.
Yep.
And thank you.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. And
Yeah, thank you.
Even all the way from Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty great.